Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at starting troublesome radial engines. Now many aircraft that you'll be seeing modeled across the marketplace, or maybe you're talking the DC-6 and stuff like that, have these old ancient radial engines that are rather challenging to get going because just sort of the logistics and the engineering and the style and all the different stuff that you have going on makes them relatively interesting to try to get going. But the good news is there's a couple tools that you can use to make your life a little bit simpler. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit first before we take a look at this, and you're going to get a feel for what's actually going on with one of these massive radial engines. And what you're probably going to observe is the fact that you've got cylinders that are arranged around it. That's a bad thing in almost every way, because that also means that all the oil that you've accumulated in the top of the engine, with time, will just slowly transit down to the bottom and kind of accumulate down here. Complicating things, of course, for us is that these big old engines, of course, had carburetors, and carburetors are kind of involved because basically you're using Venturi and the Bernoulli principle for the purposes of trying to mix that fuel and air. And it's not going to come out evenly. It's not going to come out remotely evenly, which means different cylinders are actually going to be receiving different levels of fuel mixture. Couple all of that with the fact that these things tend to be a little bit picky as far as what RPMs they can engage at, and then once you get them going, if they're a little on the cold side, they're not going to want to engage. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but the good news is it's not too bad for us. We're going to be doing this in the Beaver today. There's other aircraft that have engines that are kind of persnickety, and that's definitely the correct terminology for that. But we're going to be using this one today because this one is particularly tricky for some folks. So let's go ahead and walk you through the process here. So what we need to do to get good combustion, of course, is we need to have the right air-fuel mixture, and we need to have a nice, strong spark, and we need to make sure we introduce that at the right time and kind of let everything sort of happen. Now, we have a lot of different tools on board here to basically facilitate that process. We have our fuel selector, which is going to be over here on the left. We're actually going to go set that to center right away, save myself some time. We have our ignition, which is going to be our spark plug, basically. We have our battery, which is going to give us our electrical power. And then we have this little obnoxious handle called a wobble pump, as well as my starter and my fuel boost. Now, one of the things we don't have that we have on the DC-6 is this little boost coil, which basically showers the cylinder with sparks to basically get the process going a little easier. We don't have to worry about that. They took that out for this particular version of this plane, so it makes our life a little bit simpler. So in order to get this kind of all going, we basically need to get everything in the right position. First thing we need to do is we need to get the oil out of the places where it doesn't need to be. Now, in the real world, what we could do is we could walk out here, and especially with the ignition turned off, is we could grab this whole propeller and we could slowly rotate it a few propeller blades by hand. And basically what you'd be doing is you'd help to kind of distribute everything around. Now, it's not the coldest day today, but of course it is a little bit involved. One thing they do give us over here is I love the fact you have like all these fun little toys and stuff like that, that if you want to play with it, you could. Shut that off. I don't need that today. The next thing we need to do is we need to prime the cylinders as evenly as possible. That's a problem for us because in order to do that, we would need something that can inject the fuel directly into the cylinders. We have a kind of that. We actually don't have a primer on board here, which makes this a little more involved. But what we do is we have a fuel boost pump, and we also have this wobble pump down here. The wobble pump is a mechanical hand-driven version of the boost pump. So let's go ahead and take a look at our instrumentation here. You'll notice over here we've got oil temperature pressure. We've also got this lovely thing that says fuel pressure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and now flip on the master real quick here. I'll go ahead and pop on the bacon light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click on the little fuel wobble pump once. And you can see here our fuel pressure shot up to about 5 psi, and now you can see it's slowly decreasing. It's actually dropped below the red line, which is not going to be enough for us to actually start. Now, some of you, of course, say, why would you go to war with that? Why would you sit there cranking this thing all afternoon when you have an electrical version? Well, watch what happens. Click! And you can see now we've shot ourselves up beyond 5 psi, which is, according to the little manual there, actually considered too high for the purposes of actually getting this thing started. There's actually a little angry warning here that says do not exceed 5 psi, and you can see we're sitting here at 5.1 psi. Whoopsie daisies. Now notice, if I kill that, it immediately drops off. Now, what we have just done is we have just flooded our engine because basically we've thrown a bunch of fuel up there, and we haven't done anything for the purposes of actually, doing anything to distribute it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of the fact that everything's shut down here. My magneto's done, and I'm going to pull a couple propeller blades through. Now, one of the things we want to do with this one is we want to make sure our propeller is all the way up into the maximum RPM position here. That's just generally recommended for any of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of sit here, crack that just a tiny bit, and I'm just going to run a couple propeller blades through. And the reason I'm going to do that is it's going to help deal with some of my problems as well as move my oil around. And I'm just going to let that go through a little bit, and nothing should catch. Good. So now normally this would be a little bit slower of a process. And if we had one of the old inertial starters, we couldn't even do this. So that's been set correctly. I like that. We've probably sucked up a little bit of that fuel. We probably have enough fuel in the system right now that we could probably run it off the fuel and then turn the fuel back on, which would be kind of involved. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get this thing ready to start. We've got the oil all mixed around. We've done a basic priming process, and I've gone ahead and disengaged our magneto here. So what we could do, of course, is we could try to crank this thing and then snap the magneto on to get it to combust. You're going to get a really loud backfire if you do that, because it's going to basically instantly go off kind of a thing. And we don't need to. This is a pretty fresh engine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go engage my magnetos into the both position, if I can get it to work here. Good luck with the mouse wheel sometimes, by the way. I'm going to make sure my bacon light is turned on. Everything's secure. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this throttle and we're going to push it forward a little bit. I'm going to make sure my propeller's set. I'm going to go ahead and enrich in the mixture here. Obviously, if we were a little bit higher in the mountains, we could use a little less mixture. And now we're basically pretty good to go. Any fuel that we've kind of left in there from our playing around should probably have either kind of drained back out or is probably kind of dissipated at this point. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it one pump of the wobble, and then we're going to try to maintain that pressure while we crank the engine until it catches. Once we feel the engine start to catch, we're going to start playing the throttle game to try to get it around 1,000 revolutions per minute, comrades. So it should work in this case. So how many different hands is this going to take? A lot. Let's do it. So I'm first going to go ahead and crank this and shove that back down. It's going to go ahead and say this is good. Crank this, and we're going to sit here with the throttle. There we go. And there we go. Right there. Perfect. Let's go ahead and see what we've got now. I'll take a look down here. Fuel pressure is maintaining steady. That needle will be going all over the place, by the way. I noticed that my oil temperature is coming up pretty smoothly. It's going to be pretty cold. Everything's going to be pretty sticky right now. A carburetor temp, we can't do up. Our cylinder temp is coming up pretty smoothly. We're coming at about 1,000 revolutions. And you probably observe how far forward my throttle is right now. Now, in the real world, as the engine progressively starts to warm up, you're probably going to actually have to apply not full throttle. That'd be terrible. Something's really broken with your aircraft. What you'll actually have to do is, as you know, everything starts moving a little bit smoothly, a lot of times you're going to have to back this up a little bit or push it forward if it's a hot versus a cold day. And you can see right now, we're sitting there happily running at about 1,000 revolutions. Everything's kind of giving us a nice little wiggle. One thing I appreciate is the fact that they gave you the ability to set the tension to these guys. So if the wiggling handles bothers you, you can just come over here and just crank it, and they'll stop wiggle wagging on you. Notice I can still move them, but you also notice the fact that this is working pretty well. So we're sitting at 1,000 RPM. Obviously, we want to be thinking about our engine right now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to back the mixture up a little bit. And the whole point of this, of course, is remember we've pumped so much fuel in this thing right now. And it's not mixing very evenly because nothing's really the right temperature at this point. So by backing this up just a tiny bit, we're going to reduce the risk of basically carbonizing our lovely spark plugs there. We kind of need those for our flight. So that's just kind of one of those things. So now we're basically going to sit here and we're going to let this thing warm up. Now, when I flip my head down here, this is kind of an interesting thing. In the real world, these engines do not warm up quickly. It's just kind of the nature of the beast, especially if it's cooler outside, like this nice cool winter day here. And you'll notice here that my optimum temperature range is pretty good. Generally, anything above 150 is considered pretty all set as far as temperature goes. Notice my oil temperature has not even reached its basically operating at a particular point. And you'll also see my cylinders are still relatively cold right now. And that just gives you an idea of just how tricky these things are to really go. Now, when you're dealing with a radial, of course, you have to be very gentle with it. These are ancient pieces of like 1920s and 30s technology that have been progressively updated a little bit here, a little bit there, and now we're basically getting ready to go. Now, let's go ahead and give this thing a few minutes to warm up. All right, we've given this thing a little bit of time to warm up. We've done our run-up. Everything's looking pretty good. We've let everything kind of stabilize, and now we're here on the runway getting ready for takeoff here. So take a look over here. You can see even after we've spent probably about 6 or 7 minutes now trying to get this thing to warm up, and we're actually at a higher RPM than 1,000, basically in an effort to try to get this thing to cook a little bit, just to give you an idea. And looking down here, you can see my cylinder head temperature is almost catastrophically too hot right now. You'd always fly between these two temps. I'm really surprised that it allows you to go that high, but it also depends on where the temperature probe is. One thing we want to think about now, of course, is making sure we have a nice stable fuel pressure. You can see that little needle is dancing around here. That's just the nature of the beast. And when, of course, we call it full power on this thing, we need to make sure everything's going to be running smoothly so it doesn't give us any issues, kind of a thing like that. So before takeoff, of course, we're going to run through all of our usual kind of checks and things like that. I'm actually going to click on the fuel boost pump in case something happens to the engine-driven pump during our takeoff process here. Now, temperature-wise, cylinder temperatures are fine. Our oil temperatures are a little bit low. So let's go ahead and re-enrich the mixture here. We want to use fuel rich here. And when we're ready for takeoff, what we're going to do is we're just going to smoothly apply the power. And that's, again, another huge thing with these older radial engines. So I'm just going to give it a nice gentle push. Again, we're not going to get any too crazy here. Remember, we do have a supercharger on board here. So as you can see, it's just starting to catch up. That's going to be our good old power here. We're going to now smoothly apply it to our next level. That looks pretty good right there. And we're just going to enjoy the climb here. Again, we don't need much to get this thing airborne. Once we do get ourselves up in the air, we want to monitor everything. Notice as soon as we did that, by the way, everything went boing and flew up at record high speeds. Remember, it's only about 60 degrees F today, about 15 degrees on the C scale. So it's just incredible how that happens. And now that we have gotten ourselves some altitude, you have to remember the other big thing about radial engines, and that's going to be always knowing that anything we change is the thing that's going to give us the problem that could potentially damage us. So as we're climbing here, we don't really want to start messing with things unless they're catastrophically overheating or anything like that. We really, really, really want to wait before we start touching things, because once we do, that's when bad things are going to start to happen here. So what we're going to do is we're now going to get us all kind of squared up and ready for our climb. So we're going to do this kind of carefully here. I'm going to go start by reducing my power here. It's going to be manifold pressure to about 30 inches, which if I zoom in real quickly here, you can see that's right at the bottom of the green range there. That's going to give you a nice climb. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently go ahead and decrease my RPM until it gets into the safe region, which is going to be about 2,200. Now, in the real world, of course, when we pull that back, the thing goes round, 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 round. And again, that's a technical term to say that the RPM oscillates. But the cool thing there is it's never that even in the real world. It's just one of those things. So now that we're climbing, we want to think about a couple more things. We want to think about all of our temps and pressures. And we also want to be thinking about how aggressively we're climbing. We've made our power reduction, which is going to help us out quite a bit as far as our climb performance. But the other thing we need to think about now, and this is really important, is if we climb too slowly, we're going to slowly overheat everything. If we climb quickly, it's just going to make our climb take a really, really long time. That's a technical term. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our little flaps here. We'll put this, we can actually go to climb cruise flaps. One of the neat things about a Beaver here is we do have these little kind of quarter flap sort of things that we can utilize, but I'm actually going to clean the plane up even more to allow us to basically start to build up a little bit of speed here, which is going to help with cooling that gigantic radial in the front. Now, the other thing, of course, is now that we're starting our climb process, we're going to be monitoring everything, make sure our fuel pressure is steady. You can already see my temperature in the bottom right corner of the screen there. We are basically halfway up to my maximum cylinder temperature here. And remember, it's a cool day. This is not a boiling day or anything like that. If it was really that big of a risk, we could do a substantial reduction in climb power as well in order to make it a little bit safer. I can do something like all the way down here to about 25 inches, and I can even bring my RPM even lower. Keep in mind, when you do make reductions to the propeller RPM, you're going to be increasing oil pressure, which is just kind of the nature of the beast. It's how we adjust basically the pitch of that particular propeller. So kind of keep that in the back of your head as well. But even that little teeny tiny adjustment there has just knocked about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 degrees Celsius off of it. And it's only had it has had an impact as far as my climb speed has, but it's not nearly as dramatic as it could be. And obviously an overheating radial engine is going to be a non-functioning radial engine. Enjoy.